right? What up, dudes? So recently I've been trying to figure out a way to do some sort of Skylanders video, since I absolutely adore the game and the series, and I've seen a ton of videos about making Marvel Rivals style games out of other franchises. Which leads me to the idea that got shot into my head. Skylanders Rivals. Now obviously they wouldn't call it that, it would be something much more interesting, but it gets my point across. Now, if you're not too familiar with Skylanders, let me give you a brief overview of the lore. I can't go into everything because Skylanders lore is very convoluted, but overall, the main gist is that Skylanders is just a game from 2011 that touched the hearts of all sorts of children through the use of interesting and unique characters, all while ravaging the wallets of their parents, leading the Toys for Life genre. This is also the same genre that we later got Disney Infinity for, what people now know for Amiibos. That wouldn't have been anything without Skylanders. And I'm sure that some that came before it. Skylanders was my first game and I love it. For those of you unfamiliar with the Toys for Life genre, it essentially just means that you have to buy this little figure that you place down on a portal and it reads that figure and it sends it directly into the game. It's actually really cool. I get why they don't exist anymore, but I absolutely love them. Not to mention how amazing it was as a child, because I adored each character that I bought. I saw them in a way as these mystical friends that I could have, like the people that I looked up to on TV, like Percy Jackson or Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon. I wanted a little guy like that. So then I got my personal favorite of the bunch, Bash. Oh my god, I love him. He's so cool, and I could gawk over him for a whole video. Now for the actual story of Skylanders, it typically follows the main villain, usually Chaos, accompanied by Glumshanks, with some new whimsical plan to take over Skylands, which is essentially just a realm of infinite floating islands, and somehow the developers managed to make each island feel unique and very interesting. But back to Chaos, his plans are about as comical as you'd imagine for a kid's game, but they get surprisingly dark. Like for example, his first mission we ever find out about in Skylander Spyro's Adventure, Chaos's whole plan is to destroy the Core of Light, which is a device that's only job is to fill the universe with light so that the darkness cannot take over. There was also a time when he broke the worst criminals ever, the Doom Raiders, out of jail so that he could rule the Skylands. Most of them were convicted terrorists or broccoli guy, outside of trying to enslave the infinite Skylands under his rule and banishing all the other Skylanders to Earth as figures you play with. But the narrator and sort of guide, I guess, of Skylanders is Master Eon, the wizard who raised Spyro and leads Skylanders Academy, basically a training ground for people who want to become Skylanders but aren't fully trained enough so they can learn to grow their powers. Remember, these guys are saving an infinite realm from the likes of dragons, terrorists, or even sentient magical forces sometimes, so there's got to be a lot of them and they've got to be well trained. Eon reaches out to us, calling you a portal master and walking you, yes you, the viewer, through how to use your powers to put Skylanders back into the Skylands to save it once more. This lore is surprisingly dark for a kid's game because it means that all these little figures that I have sitting around in my collection are living beings who are just watching as I do whatever it is I do my daily day, wishing they could get back to their loving families and saving their country. They're fun little knickknacks and they're not going anywhere. Now, to adapt this into a Marvel Rivals style game, I feel like it's honestly not all that hard. The lore is always a little wacky but surprisingly serious, so I could see the story take place where Chaos and Eon clash, making the red and blue teams with pretty distinct evil and good sides. Chaos would find some unique and wacky magical thing, or actually I think he's done it in the past, where he would create his own Skylanders. And as you fight through various islands and areas in Skylands, that I will cover later in the video for potential maps, along with gimmicks that I think could make Skylanders Rivals a really unique addition to the hero shooter genre. Another thing I think would be kind of cool, Skylanders made dark variants for certain Skylanders, and I think it could be really interesting to see those as the enemy skins, no matter which character you're playing as. Most likely those would just be skins you could purchase instead of enemy models. I just think it's interesting. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the characters. Starting with the most iconic Skylander as a Vanguard. Now, Spyro is a no-brainer to be added to a Skylanders Rivals. Not only is he the most popular Skylander by a landslide, but he's also one of the most powerful, being actually known in the lore to be able to use any of the elements that he wants to, except he chooses to focus on fireballs. That's exactly what makes him a magic element in the games, and I believe he would be here as well, but we'll get to what that means later on. For now, let's start with his primary fire, fireballs, where he shoots out 3 fireballs in a line that explode on impact. Now this ties directly into his secondary, Fire Fan, where he shoots out 3 fireballs in a fan pattern. Now this is exactly like Genji's primary fire and secondary fire, where it's much faster to use the secondary one, but it goes out in a much wider arc. However, his are technically explosives. Since Spyro's a dragon, he can obviously fly into the air, and I needed an ability for him to get down a lot faster. So I took some notes from Venom here and went with Earth Pound. This is where Spyro slams into the ground, knocking everyone around him up and out. So if he slams directly on someone, then they're going to be knocked straight up and around him. But if the people around him will be kind of dispersed. Onto his more defensive second ability, we have Fire Shield. Now this is essentially Hulk's shielding ability, however whenever these take damage they remember it, meaning that whenever these bubbles pop due to taking too much damage, they explode out in a small AoE around Spyro and his allies that deal a percentage of the damage dealt to the bubble. And onto my personal favorite ability of Spyro's, we have Comet Charge. Now this is your typical Reinhardt charge, where Spyro dashes forward, pins someone, and if they hit a wall, then he deals extreme amounts of damage. However, Spyro can utilize this a little bit differently since he can also go up and down rather than just side to side like Reinhardt. Now for his passive, we have Draconic Lineage. This allows Spyro to fly by double tapping spacebar just like Minecraft. However, due to Spyro's scales being completely indestructible, he receives reduced damage from the first hit that he takes. Meaning that if he's getting peppered by smaller bullets, he's going to take next to nothing, and even if it's a big hit, then he's going to take a big chunk off of it. We're going to be covering all the team-ups later on after I've introduced all the characters, so instead let's get right into his ultimate with Daybringer's Flame. Now if you watch my Mutants video, it's going to sound very similar to the Phoenix kit that I made, which is a lot better than what Marvel Rivals made. This basically allows Spyro to create a fireball in his mouth and charge it up as long as he wants until a maximum, and then shoot it out, dealing more damage and covering more of an area the more that it's charged. Overall, I see Spyro as more of a brawl tank, my personal favorite kind of tank, where he kind of wants to just get in, deal big damage with his explosions, not really worrying about the recoil damage, constantly using his fire shield to block the damage from his other brawlers, and also still dish out damage while using Earth Pound either to get back to his supports in time if they're getting dove or something along those lines. And overall, I really like this kit, and I just love the idea of Skylanders coming back as some sort of hero shooter, since the characters are just so cool and interesting. Speaking of interesting, here's a cyborg dragon. Now, Drobot is a Skylander of the tech element. Originally, he was a dragon born on some of the highest mountains in Skylands, but he didn't have wings. So he found some ancient technology, and using his genius brain, he was able to make his own, along with a helmet that allows him to shoot lasers out of his eyes, a spear for a tail, and many other tech-related abilities. Speaking of, it's time to get into his primary fire, quadratic lasers. This is where Drobot fires out 4 staggered lasers from his eyes and wings. I see this acting kind of how Venom's primary fire works, where they're just kind of staggered off of each other, but they're all connected by one shot from your primary fire. Onto his secondary, we have Repulsor Shield. This is where Drobot pushes his wings forward and projects a giant shield in front of him, sort of how we've seen from Doctor Strange or Reinhardt. And now for his first real ability, we have Overdrive. This is where Drobot really overclocks all of his technological abilities by scanning the area, trying to locate any invisible targets, while also changing his primary fire, making it so that he fires all 4 lasers at the same time. Essentially, it wouldn't slow down how many times he shoots naturally, it would just make it so that there are 4 beams instead of 1 for every staggered pulse. This would only last for a handful of seconds, making it just a really quick way to burst down enemies. Now onto his second ability, we have Tactical Blade Gear. This is where Drobot rears back and launches out 3 blade gears that ricochet off of surfaces and characters up to 3 times. I see this working in a similar way to Moon Knight's primary fire, or once it kind of bounces around for a second then it just disappears. Now for its third ability, we have Afterburners. This allows Drobot to free roam in the air at an increased speed. I think about how Ultron's shift works, instead, Drobot is naturally on the ground, and whenever he hits shift, he turns into a flying character for a second. Moving on to Drobot's passive, we have Hover Jets. This makes Drobot naturally float, allowing him to soar over water or ground effects, and fall slowly by holding spacebar. Now, water is something we'll get to in a moment with the maps and gimmicks section of this video, but as far as ground effects are considered, I think about this sort of as like maybe Earth Shatter from Overwatch, or the thing's Ground Pound Slam that turns off movement abilities. Essentially, Drobot would be able to hover over this, making him essentially immune to these effects. Now onto his ultimate, we have Light Core. This is where Drobot charges up his back a little bit and flashes everyone in an AoE, blinding them and stunning them for a moment. This would be very similar to Doctor Strange's ultimate, but he wouldn't send their spirit out of their body, and instead blinding them, making them slightly more vulnerable to attacks. Now I could see Drobot being played as a bit more of a poke or anchor tank, so like how we've seen from Doctor Strange. I could really see him using his primary fire to just kind of poke at people, not really dealing too much damage, but just dealing enough damage to keep people on their toes, maybe get a pick on someone in the backline, that sort of thing. Utilizing his tactical blade gear to really build up his ult charge by bouncing in between a bunch of grouped up enemies. I could totally see him using a mixture of his afterburners and overdrive to fly up really high and then scan the area for any invisible characters to make sure that his backline is not about to get obliterated. And then obviously using Repulsor Shield to block people from the front, back, wherever he needs to. And I could definitely see him playing pretty similarly to Magneto. This little guy is called Trigger Happy. He has a vast arsenal of coin-based weaponry, and I absolutely love this crazy little idiot. Getting into his primary fire, we have golden pistols. These are dual pistols that fire off fairly quickly one after another. Now the fun thing about these is they shoot coins that can ricochet off walls and barriers. These don't auto-target like Domino for my strategist video, but they do ricochet once, allowing you to kind of hit some wacky angles and maybe get a really interesting pick. Onto his secondary fire, we have Golden Charge. This is where Trigger Happy charges up a bigger blast that deals critical damage to all barriers and at full charge will knock back enemies. Onto his first real ability, we have Latch. This is where Trigger Happy clings onto an ally and sits on their shoulder or kind of behind them, holding onto them. During this time, he does kind of angle himself so that the ally will body block for him, but his attack speed is halved, being able to only fire one pistol at a time. For his second ability, we have Safe Recovery, allowing Trigger Happy to summon a safe that he can shoot out of upon dying. This is very similar to Rocket's Res Beacon, however it only applies to Trigger Happy. For his third ability, we have Cannon Turret. This is where Trigger Happy bunkers down in a turret, similar to how Punisher works, but his turret changes his primary fire to a minigun and his secondary fire to that of a cannonball. Additionally, he can load himself into the cannon to fire himself out and able to retreat or to dive into the backline, if that's something he wanted to do. For his passive, we have Tax Return, allowing him to fully reload either his turret or his pistols every time he gets an elimination. And to end off here, we have Bombs Away, his ultimate. This is where Trigger Happy pulls out a comically large bomb, lights it, fires himself up into the air, and can be directed to land wherever he wants. This would work similarly to Phoenix's ultimate, but the entire time while he's in the air, he would be moving throughout the air, and he would have a duration until the bomb would just explode mid-air, killing him. Now this silly little tree guy has a very sad backstory. Originally, he was just a magical tree ant that was an enormous tree, and he had lots of family around him that were also trees. And most of the time, he would just stay there in the forest sleeping. Until one day when a band of trolls chopped him down along with his entire family and logged all of them, leaving Stump Smash with nothing more than hammers for hands and in the state that we see him now. As for how the rest of his family are doing, we have no idea. Now onto his primary fire, we have Wood Hammer. This is a simple melee attack where Stump Smash hits his hammers onto the ground, dealing damage to a small AoE around him. This would also lightly knock back and displace enemies, but it wouldn't be anything that you'd ever really have to worry about. Onto his secondary fire, we have Acorn Spit. This is a ranged acorn bomb that slows down enemies in the area around where it lands. This could also work exactly like Squirrel Girl's Acorn where it stuns people, but personally I want it to be just a little bit different, so I see it more as Groot's secondary fire. Onto his first real ability, we have Thornbark. This is where Stump Smash generates a couple overshields, but this health would be separated by being the color red. While you have this red health, any damage you take causes you to explode out a small AoE of thorns, dealing damage to everyone in your area around you. And for his final ability, we have Pollen Pounder. This is a continuous primary fire strike where Stump Smash increases his movement and his attack speed by just slamming the ground again and again relentlessly. This also constantly picks up his passive, Pollen Plume, where upon defeating an enemy, they puff out pollen that poisons enemies and heals Stump slowly. This wouldn't be your normal strategist healing, it would be more like a couple healing a second, just something that could help him tank a little bit more, even though he isn't a Vanguard. Now for his ultimate ability, we have Mega Nut. This is where Stump Smash vomits out an enormous spiky nut that bounces off walls and loosely tracks enemies for major damage. And I couldn't fit this on the graphic, but if you shoot at the nut, then it will split into 2 and then it can split into 4. And after that, you can actually destroy them by shooting them. But the smaller nuts could hit you more often, but they deal less damage. Now this badass fishman joined the military in search of adventure. While journeying through an area called the Misty Lagoon, he met an enchanting mermaid and vowed to return to her after his tour was finished. Keeping his promise, he came back years later, only to find out that pirates had kidnapped her, causing him to search all over Skylands, and even though he never found her, he joins the Skylanders to help protect others from such an evil fate. To this day, he still keeps an ever watchful eye for the beautiful mermaid and the pirates who took her. But with that sad story aside, let's get into his primary fire, Deep Sea Blast. This is where Gilgrunt fires out a water blast from his trident/harpoon launcher that heals allies and damages enemies it passes through. This is exactly like Jeff's primary fire, but I wrote this down before they made the changes. I'm still not going to change it though. Onto his secondary fire, we have Lightning Strike. Wielding his trident, he's able to charge up a bolt of lightning and fire it off, dealing damage the more it's charged up, and at full charge, piercing through enemies. Onto his first real ability, we have Wild Whirlpool. And I will mention all of his water stays on the ground, creating a little area, kind of Splatoon style, where you can get a little bit of healing off of the ground itself. With Wild Whirlpool, he creates an AoE around him where he just blasts water aimlessly, creating roughly a 30-meter circle of just pure AoE healing. For his second ability, we have First Aid Starfish. This is where Gilgrunt places a starfish on an ally, similar to how Luna Snow would place a snowflake on an ally. However, this starfish bursts into some passive healing, similar to Mantis' secondary fire, that will passively heal them after they take 1/4 of their HP maximum. For his next ability, we have Hydropack Ascension. This is a water jetpack that pushes Gil directly upwards and heals anyone underneath him. This would either be a resource similar to Star-Lord, or it could be like Rocket's jetpack where it just fires him upwards and just blasts the water down. Onto his passive, we have Gilman's Biology. This allows Gilgrunt to have increased speed and unlimited ammo while in water areas on the map. This means submerged in a pond or just in a water elemental zone. We'll get into those more into the maps and gimmicks section of the video. Onto his ultimate ability, we have Drop Anchor. This is where Gilgrunt summons an enormous anchor to crash into the ground, dealing damage to anyone it hits, I would assume killing anyone it lands on, and creates a constant AoE of healing. Now if that looks weird because of the graphic on screen, that's because I forgot to write that down. My bad. Now Stealth Elf was abandoned as a child, being left inside the hollow of an old tree with no memory of how she got there or what happened to her family. She got taken in by a ninja-like forest creature. I don't think we ever actually see this creature, but that's the description we're given. Essentially, she was raised by a ninja in the deep forest and decided to become a Skylander to uncover the mystery behind her origins. Now moving on to her kit, let's start with her primary fire, Dagger Dart. This is essentially just a knife throw primary fire where Stealth Elf will just throw her daggers and deal double damage if she hits anyone in the back. This is an actually useful version of Loki's passive. For her secondary fire, we have Smoke Bomb. This is where Stealth Elf throws down 3 smoke bombs, creating a large area of smoke around her. Now, this smoke obscures allies and also will passively heal them. During this time, Stealth Elf is completely invisible, whether she's in the smoke or not, and she will remain invisible until she deals damage. Her next ability is Whisper's Assistance. This is where you get to choose an ally and they gain a smaller elf on their shoulder called Whisper. Now Whisper, while she's on one of your allies' shoulders, will slowly heal them every time you deal damage. Onto her final ability, we have Straw Summoner. This is where Stealth Elf can place down scarecrows that vaguely resemble her that also emit passive healing. It does have larger burst healing whenever you deal damage, and it deals even more healing if you get an elimination. Onto her passive, we have Sylvan Regen. After not taking damage for a couple seconds, she slowly starts to tick her health right back up, which is very similar to the passive that supports get in Overwatch, but this one would be much better. Onto her ultimate, we have Little Friends. This is where Stealth Elf pulls out a minigun that shoots out daggers, and during this time, all of your summons pump out constant healing. And while having a minigun that shoots daggers for a support character is absolutely hilarious, I did struggle to make a flanking style strategist, but I think I did a pretty good job all things considered. Maybe I'll tweak a couple more things in a future video, but as of right now, I'm pretty proud of it. Alright, now moving on to some of the maps that I'd love to see. I think Skylands Academy is a no-brainer. It's awesome, it's humongous. Also, I think it would just be awesome to see some of the other students in the background fleeing or watching and cheering on Eon's team. The second map that I'd love to see is Cloudbreak Islands. This is from Swap Force, and this map is known for having a volcano that erupts every 100-ish years, releasing magic back into Skylands. And I would love for that to be the end screen with some wacky version of swapped characters, because that's actually what created the Swap Force fighters. Another one is the Thumpin' Wumpa Islands. Now these are Crash Bandicoot's islands, but Skylanders, or more specifically Spyro, has used him in a ton of their work. Another cool map I think would be awesome is Cloudcracker Prison, a massive prison that holds some of the most dangerous criminals like the Doom Raiders, and I would love to see various prisoners surround the map cheering on the evil team as they try to break out of the prison while the good team tries to lock them back up. Then there's the Lost City of Arcus, an ancient robot army from the first game that Chaos wants to get control over so that he could rule the Skylands. I could see Eon's team trying to escort the Iron Fist of Arcus, while Chaos's is trying to take it for himself. Now I know that that made absolutely no sense if you never played the first game, but essentially it's a magic MacGuffin that allows him to control all of the giant robots. And then finally, the only one I really don't know much about is Malfor's Underworld. And while I don't know much about the underworld of the Skylands, I feel like there's way too much potential not to do something. Not to mention having Malfor be in the background or even a part of the map could be awesome. Now let's get into the gimmicks. Obviously they could just use team-ups, which I did go through and make. Now I did do two variants of each team-up, of one being the anchor and one being the receiver. Starting out, we have Spyro and Stealth Elf's team-up, Stealth Master. With stealth anchoring, Spyro can briefly become invisible and leave a double of himself in place. Or Spyro's Straw Boy, where Spyro anchors and Stealth can put a mobile Scarecrow on his back, allowing her to heal from virtually anywhere, and for Spyro to keep it safe, so keeping people around him would heal everyone. Next up we have Tech Turbocharge. With Trigger Happy anchoring, Drobot is allowed to respawn out of Trigger Happy's safe. And with the Team Up Tech Pack, Drobot anchors and Trigger Happy can latch on to anyone he wants without having to use his hands, allowing him to shoot both revolvers simultaneously while latched. Then for our last two, we have Waterlogged, where Gil anchors and Stump Smash every time he's healed by the water Gil Grunt shoots will gradually build up a resource meter that he can expend, able to heal himself. Very similar to Roadhog's healing nowadays. And an Acorn Sprouter. Stump anchors and Gil mixes in a bunch of acorns into his water pack, allowing him to fire them out whenever he's healing and create little trees that create an AoE of healing around them, and can obscure damage until broken. Now with the team-ups out of the way, let me talk about some of the more interesting gimmicks that I think Skylanders could personally use. First idea I came up with was elemental team-ups, where the more teammates you have of the same element, the stronger their respective kits get. Damage for duelists, healing for strategists, or HP for vanguards. This is not like Pokemon. If you use a fire character, they're not any better against the grass characters or water fire. I think that would actually be helpful here, where having multiple characters of the same element could boost each other. And a style of team-ups that I thought could be pretty unique to Skylanders is a link off of the elemental team-ups, where instead of having a specific character tied to a specific character in order to get a team-up, maybe having a specific element tie with a specific character could give them a new ability. Now for the final gimmick that I came up with is having the map itself be the gimmick for the characters. Making certain abilities activate in certain parts of the map. For example, Stump Smash has a team up with Gil Grunt called Waterlogged. His ability could also be activated if he stands in a pond area of the map or if there's just straight up a water area. I think this would do a great job of making certain characters really good on certain maps and making others not so good. Or another idea I had was having certain areas give elemental boosts to add a layer onto where players want to take team fights. So you have the enemy team trying to stop them before they get to a certain place, and at the same time you have your team trying to get to that place, probably using some resources they wouldn't normally, so that they can start to pivot and move that fight closer to the boosted area so they can start to win the fight over. Now obviously I'm not a game developer, but Skylanders just has so much they could use to do in games other than what we've seen in the past. And while Skylanders is usually PvE, and I would love to have a hero shooter that actually focused on that, unlike the false promises from Overwatch. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Maybe I'll do more Skylanders as rivals characters in the future if that's something y'all find interesting. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I loved this video. I hope you did too. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.